Welcome back to Universal News Frontier. Today, we've got a critical explainer on a fast-moving crisis that is absolutely hammering the American economy, and honestly, hitting your wallet right this very second. We're talking about the 2026 energy shock. This is easily the most significant disruption to the global energy supply we've seen since the 1970s. So we're going to map out exactly how a distant geopolitical bottleneck unhinged our domestic retail fuel markets and what it actually means for everything from your weekly grocery run to the future of our national infrastructure. Okay, let's jump right into the numbers with this jarring figure, $4.45. That was the national average for a gallon of regular gas on May 4, 2026. To put that in perspective, that is a staggering 40.8% spike from just 1 year ago. The sheer speed of this increase is literally unprecedented. I mean, in the very first week of this crisis alone, prices shot up over 21%. And if you're driving a diesel truck or working in logistics, you're looking at a brutal average of $5.64. We breached that $4 psychological threshold at a speed we simply haven't seen since the 2022 energy shocks. But hey, we all know national averages don't tell the whole story, right? This breakdown brilliantly illustrates the regional reality of the crisis. Out in California, drivers are paying well over $6 at the pump because of their structural reliance on imported oil. But the financial pain actually cuts deeper in other places. Take Alabama, for example. Folks there are taking a severe $52 per month hit to their per capita income. In these car-dependent states where people have longer commutes and less public transit, families are absorbing massive percentage increases just to cover their daily living costs. So how exactly did we get here? Right now, fuel is eating up 50% of the total operating costs for road transportation. That is way up from the normal 30% baseline. To understand why it suddenly costs so much to move a truck full of goods across Ohio, or for a family to just commute to work in Alabama, we have to look across the globe. We need to figure out how a distant geopolitical conflict triggered an absolute explosion in domestic fuel and freight costs. Let's trace this back to the geopolitical trigger point. In late February 2026, a coordinated air campaign targeting Iranian infrastructure, Operation Epic Fury, escalated incredibly fast. Almost immediately, Iranian forces issued a blanket ban on navigation right through the Strait of Hormuz. By March, kinetic strikes essentially paralyzed commercial shipping in the area, and by mid-April, the U.S. Navy stepped in with a counter-blockade. What we're looking at now is what military strategists call a dual blockade. This is a complete tactical maritime vacuum. You have the U.S. Navy blockading Iranian ports to dial up the economic pressure, while Iran maintains a hostile, restrictive grip on the strait itself. This unprecedented stalemate has effectively trapped 20 million barrels of oil right behind a war zone. Just to put that into perspective, that is nearly 20% of the world's daily petroleum and liquefied natural gas supply just suddenly taken off the board. Because of this, analysts are calling it a complete systemic collapse of maritime logistics. Major shipping carriers suspended new bookings practically overnight. And the reason why is pretty simple. Maritime insurers either totally yanked their war risk coverage or jacked up premiums to 4 to 6 times their pre-war levels. Legal, insured commercial transit through one of the most vital economic corridors on Earth just became financially impossible for Western-aligned firms. And that global shockwave? It slammed into our domestic shores incredibly fast. Look at this number. A 119.9% surge in the load-to-truck ratio for refrigerated transport. The era of cheap freight is effectively over, folks. Independent carriers are facing lethal cash flow compression right now. They're suffering from what's called the fuel surcharge lag. Basically, they have to buy today's $5.64 diesel to haul your goods, but they get reimbursed based on last week's lower fuel prices. It's squeezing the capacity completely out of the market and driving thinly capitalized fleets straight into bankruptcy. With this brutal squeeze on the U.S. logistics sector and a massive hit to your discretionary income, we have to look at Washington. Global crude benchmarks previously surged to $126 a barrel, creating a 15% shortfall in global oil supply directly driven by this strait closure. So how exactly are lawmakers attempting to step in and ease the pain for Americans? Well, we're seeing a bipartisan legislative push take shape. Lawmakers are rallying behind the Gas Prices Relief Act of 2026. The main idea here is a gas tax holiday, basically a temporary suspension of the federal gasoline excise tax running through October. And importantly, it includes directives to make sure oil companies actually pass those savings directly down to you, the consumer, rather than just absorbing them as extra profit. But it's not that simple. Policymakers are caught in a seriously tight bind here. On one side, you get immediate, albeit modest relief at the pump, 18.4 cents per gallon back for gasoline and 24.4 cents for diesel. On the other side, the cost. You'd be stripping billions from the already fragile Highway Trust Fund, completely undermining the very system that pays to fix American roads. This table lays out what a massive fiscal headache this really is. A 5-month suspension from May through September would reduce gross revenue to the Highway Trust Fund by an estimated $17 billion. That is 46% of the total projected fuel tax revenue for the entire fiscal year. The long-term risk here is that it could accelerate the insolvency of our federal infrastructure programs. Experts calculate that if states have to defer road maintenance, declining road quality could eventually cost everyday drivers up to $725 per year in extra vehicle repairs. That would wipe out the tax holiday savings entirely. Now, alongside the legislative debate, we have executive action. To combat these global supply shocks, the Trump administration has initiated massive emergency oil releases. This is part of a coordinated international effort to pump 400 million barrels into the market. But as you can see, there's a glaring vulnerability. Our Strategic Petroleum Reserve inventory is sitting at roughly 398 million barrels. That means our emergency stockpile is only at about 55% of its authorized capacity, mostly because the releases we made back in 2022 and 2023 were never fully refilled. We simply have a much smaller buffer today than we had in previous crises. Because of that constrained capacity, the administration's emergency strategy is using a pretty clever mechanism. It's not a straight sale, it's a loan and return exchange. Step 1, the Department of Energy actually loans the barrels to refiners. Step 2, those participating companies have to return the borrowed barrels later on. And step 3, they must pay a 24% premium in additional crude oil. This setup is specifically designed to rebuild our stockpile and enhance our energy security down the road, all without putting a direct cost on the taxpayer. Okay, so we've looked at the pain at the pump, the logistics crisis, and the government's response. But right now, the Federal Reserve is facing a grueling policy bind. They're caught between cutting rates to help a slowing economy or keeping rates high to fight off inflation driven by these energy costs, which leaves us asking, does fallout from this blockade actually stop at the gas pump? The short answer is absolutely not. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical artery for so much more than just crude oil, and the impacts on non-oil commodities are staggering. We are literally looking at a threat to global food security because of halted sulfur exports, which are absolutely crucial for the phosphate fertilizers used in places like Brazil, India, and China. We're seeing methanol shortages hitting the plastics industry. Even the high-tech sector is taking a hit. Taiwan relies heavily on Qatari liquefied natural gas passing through the strait just to manufacture microchips and semiconductors. And the green energy transition? Highly vulnerable, thanks to disruptions in the synthetic graphite we need for electric vehicle batteries. This multi-layered predicament proves that military escorts for individual tankers simply aren't enough to resolve the systemic risks of skyrocketing insurance and naval mines anymore. Because of this, we are seeing a definitive, massive shift in global industrial policy. Global industries are completely abandoning those fragile just-in-time logistics models. Instead, they're aggressively pivoting to just-in-case systems. This means prioritizing the costly but absolutely necessary building of strategic buffer stocks and actively seeking out diversified supply routes, making sure a single choke point can never paralyze them like this again. As we look toward the future, the executive closure of the Strait of Hormuz has demonstrated something profound. Traditional military dominance is no longer enough to guarantee the stability of international trade routes against asymmetric warfare. This leaves us with a critical, provocative question to ponder. Can the United States successfully adapt its economy, rethink its infrastructure funding, and build real domestic energy resilience in a world where naval power no longer guarantees cheap global shipping? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep your eyes on Universal News Frontier to see how this incredible recalibration unfolds.